Thank you all for joining us. We're invited Dr. David Schrunk from the Institutes of Science and Laws to give us a little bit talk about democracy, about lawmaking, about other things that come to your mind, David, as you're here. And this is part of our Colorado State University's Year of Democracy. So this is a thematic year that we have going on. So a number of events that are occurring across campus online. So just a little bit on David's bio here. So David has multiple sort of thoughts and processes that go through his head. I've had the pleasure of speaking with him this morning for breakfast. He's an aerospace engineer, but also a medical doctor. So he has specialization in nuclear medicine and diagnostic radiology. But he's also an avid author, a number of presentations and books on topics of law, medicine, space exploration. So as another plug, we also have a talk tonight at Avogadro's, where David will be talking a bit more about sort of his aerospace and the concept of how do we explore and colonize the moon. Is that right, David? So we'll talk about law this morning, and then if we really want to get into space, we can talk a little bit of that more this afternoon. And so just a little bit more. So David Schrunk founded the Science of Laws Institute. And so a lot of his work he's going to talk about today, but he's also an avid member as part of the INCOSE, the International Council of System Engineering and Lawmaking Working Group. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, David, to lead us through there. We have a series of sort of breaks as we move through, and then also an opportunity to grab lunch after the first part. Thank you, David.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me. I want to thank Dixie for shepherding me through all of this, multiple phone calls and so on, and Janine for helping me with arrangements. So I have 4 segments to this talk, building up. I want to start a new science, a science of laws. A university setting is the place to introduce new ideas and get shouted down, perhaps, or maybe not. But I think it's time for a new science, a science of laws, and move laws and lawmaking into the realm of science. And the thematic year of democracy is perfect because I believe that we can advance the concepts of democracy through science and engineering.
I'll just move the camera a little bit for you. Oh, you're a little bit taller than me, so.
All right.
There we go, perfect. Let's see you.
All right. So lawmaking, democracy, and the science of laws. I want to introduce a new science, the science of laws. Yes, Dixie.
Just making sure you're good to go.
All right, that's better. And enable the ascendancy of government to the status of what I call a true democracy. So first part is I'm going to talk about government, then the threat to democracy by the existing system. The third part is to review what science is and how we should exploit science for this purpose. And then the last section will be on the science of laws. So the first part I'm going to talk about from the Paleolithic to the Enlightenment, how government evolved. All life forms have an ecological niche or niche for their survival and propagation. And usually this is a favorable physical environment, the forest, the ocean, the flora, the Amazon jungle, whatever. Except as humans don't have an ecological niche in terms of a physical location. What is our ecological niche? It's our intellect, our ability to innovate and to create tools. We can create our own ecological niche. So we create tools that makes us different from all other life forms. So innovation, the ability to create tools and thereby solve problems. Everybody solves problems. We are all engineers. The problem-solving process, just briefly, is a definition of problem. You need to do that before you can start. You brainstorm ideas, you gather the proper knowledge, tools, and materials, you test and validate solutions, and then you accept the best solution. And you record and store knowledge. So very important in this process is knowledge. knowledge to start with, and you finish up by recording knowledge. For the Paleolithic people, there's no way to store knowledge. If you learn something, you could show and tell to the next person, but there was no way of storing knowledge or passing it on except by just direct contact with people. I got this image from on the internet, how to create images, and I said, give me a Paleolithic man. So this is what turned out. This robust person is well-fed, it looks like. It's kind of late in the Paleolithic. He's got a rope wound around the staff there. The rope was invented late in the Paleolithic, but interesting character. So in terms of innovation, well, there was a big breakthrough about 200,000 years ago, 150 to 200,000 years ago. What was that breakthrough? The hyoid bone has been developing over millennia. And at that particular time, it got to the point where it has an anchor for the larynx, the muscles of the larynx. And it made speech possible. And with speech, through our innovation, we invented language. This was a huge development for humankind because this gave us access to the world of the intellect. And that's what we do now. We've developed the internet. So access to the world of the intellect is what we're all about. So instead of, if you devise a new cutting tool, for example, you can show it to the person next to you and they can remember how that's done. But with speech, you can pass this idea on to all the members of the tribe and you can get feedback from their opinions. So speech and communication gave you access to the world of the internet. This was a big step forward for our future progress. And it gave us a collective store of knowledge, but the collective store of knowledge from the Paleolithic up to just recent times was unreliable because it based upon people's memory and they might forget or they might change out the facts. So when was government invented? Here's another internet drawing showing a campfire. Got some interesting people around there, but around the Stone Age campfire, this is where the first lawmaking, laws, and government originated. So the first government, the lawmaking method, and they created a body of laws. So the people are sitting around the campfire and the say the elders, the people that are in their 20s at that time would be old. Somebody would say, well, I have an idea for, we should only allow people to take 2 ears of corn out of the food locker per day. If somebody takes more than that, we should have a rule that they can't do that or they'll be punished. So that was discussed and they said, well, let's make a law, and it was voted on and they made a law. So this is the beginning of the lawmaking process and a body of laws. And of course, the people who made the law became the future legislators. The people who enforced the law were the administrators, and the people who made judgment on whether the law was violated or not, they became the judicial branch. So all these branches of government were incorporated into this campfire group. But this is the beginning, what I call the traditional method of lawmaking, where ideas come up, ideas are discussed and debated and modified perhaps, and everybody votes on it, and if it's approved, it becomes law. Traditional method of lawmaking began with the first campfire, or the gathering around the campfire. What did I miss? Here, just that one.
I just need. Is it sharing again?
It's on the
Awesome.
screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is how laws were created to begin with. And laws are important. They are enforceable rules or orders. They are tools, and they direct and control human behavior. And these were useful because it allowed the establishment of a stable framework of government. So you have a body of laws that maintain order, resolve disputes, establish and define rights, tasks, responsibilities, and prohibitions. So a form of government was useful to long-term survival of the tribe, as it were. Useful thing. So traditional method of lawmaking, and stamp on this, an idea is debated, becomes a law. That's the way it was to begin with. That's the way it is now. It hasn't changed over all of this time. We still make laws the same way. And in terms of a control system, it's a feed-forward control system where ideas come in and laws go out. So this reached a level of sophistication, as it were, in the Roman Senate, for example, and it continues to the present time. So the structure of the early government, in terms of making laws, the heads of the clan, the chieftains sitting around, were the ones that created laws. So they became the government. They created laws and they enforced laws and they controlled people. So the heads of the clan make laws, control people. And the problem with this arrangement is that it allows abuse of government by the rulers, because the traditional method of lawmaking has no requirements for purpose or content. And human nature being the way it is, rulers, lawmakers, were able to create laws that benefit themselves, give them power and privileges, and they can pass the burdens of the laws on to the less favored groups, the subject groups or common people. So as the populations grew from tribes to villages to nations, we had the evolution of authoritarian governments. Authoritarian governments arise from the lack of standards of traditional lawmaking. So you have two classes of people: the elite ruling class that assume the sovereign power of government, sovereignty vested in the ruling class. They create, enforce, and interpret laws that benefit the ruling class. Wealth and privileges accrue to the ruling class. And the ruled or subject class, the commoners, are the majority of the population, and they bear the burden of the laws. So this is the structure of authoritarian governments. You have a permanent ruling class, the rulers control the government and create laws, and they control the people, the subjects. Now, this has been the most common form of government throughout history. We had authoritarian governments, kingdoms, for example, well into the 18th century, 19th century, still have some. So the ruling class sovereignty is most common form is a monarchy, where you have a dynasty, a royalty. They have the royal king, sovereign king or queen, and this is a stable form of government because the power is passed from the king or queen down to the offspring, to the prince or princess. So it's a stable form of government. And the power, the sovereignty rests in the ruling class, in the royal family. Other forms of authoritarian government are theocracy, where the heads of a religious belief system constitute the ruling class. And more recently, we see an idiocracy, where the heads of a political party or an ideology constitute the ruling class. These governments are characterized by the rule of man, where the rules are pretty flexible. They can change by the whim of the rulers. So it's not a stable form of, the body of laws can change according to the whim of the people who write the laws. And it leads to large, complex bodies of laws that, however there's interaction with the law, it always tends to favor the people who write the law and interpret the law, which is good for the people that rule and not so good for the people who are subject to the law. And unfortunately, this leads to the disaffection of the subject classes who have to bear poverty, illiteracy, military conscription, taxes, and they have total lack of freedom, press, speech, and religion. And this leads us up to the period of the Enlightenment. And we had the Eurocentric thought leaders in the 17th, 18th century political philosophy. they challenged the concept of a ruling class and said, we don't really need a all-powerful ruler to tell us what to do. And they introduced the ideas of liberty, toleration, progress, separation of church and state, and introduced the idea that sovereignty should be vested in the people as a whole, not in a ruling class. Of course, this was a big threat to the ruling class. The king didn't like to hear that. John Locke wrote in his essay concerning civil government, one of my favorite authors. For law in its true notions is not so much the limitation or direction of a free and intelligent agent to his proper interest, and prescribes no farther than is for the general good of those under the law. So that however it may be mistaken, the end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. So this is the beginning of the concept of democracy, freedom, that we don't need to be told what to do. We're free to do what we want to do under a rule of law that is for the good of everyone. And this initiated concept of democracy. And democracy is discussed in the ancient Greece, for example, where the people participated in lawmaking, but democracy in the sense that the government is acting on the behalf of the people to solve problems, that just arose recently. With the American Revolution is the best example of this. Where we have a constitutional government, the sovereignty is vested in the citizenry. There is no king, no ruling class. And the government is obligated to secure the rights and liberty of the people. This is a brand new concept at that time. Penned by Jefferson, Declaration of Independence. And the quote is, all men and women are created equal with certain unalienable rights. Should be inalienable, but I won't quibble. That among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and governments are instituted to secure these rights. So, a couple of points here. He didn't say that the government is obligated to make us happy. It paves the way for us to pursue our own concept of happiness. So the government paves the way for the pursuit of happiness. It's not trying to make us happy. And governments are instituted to pave the way to solve the problems that impede the pursuit of happiness. Sounds great. So what are rights and liberty? These are measurable parameters, human rights, living standards, and quality of life. These are things that can be measured, and we can determine the performance of governments based on how well the people under that government exercise their human rights and their living standards and quality of life. So rights and liberty are secured by the rule of law. The rule of law is duly enacted and observed laws that are uniformly enforced. That's as opposed to the rule of man, which is ruled by whim or arbitrary rule. So we have the branches of government: legislative create laws, administration enforces laws, judicial interprets laws. So the purpose of government is the purpose of a democratic government like we have, according to Jefferson, is to solve, mitigate, or prevent by means of laws the societal problems that degrade or threaten to degrade the rights and liberty of the people. So here's the flow diagram. As opposed to authoritarian governments, sovereignty is vested in the citizenry. So this is upside down from authoritarian governments, where the people are in control, and they control the government through elected representatives. Government creates and enforces the rule of law, and the idea is to control problems. So authoritarian governments control people. Democracy controls problems. Big difference. I've identified 3 levels of democracy. The first is electoral democracy, where you have the right to vote by secret ballot and universal suffrage. The second level is a liberal democracy, where all human rights are observed by the government. And the third level is both 1 and 2, plus the government actively seeks to solve the problems that degrade or threaten to degrade rights and liberty. the performance of democracy. In terms of electoral democracy, approximately half of the world's governments are democracies by this definition, and they have voting rights. You can vote and select people by a secret ballot. In terms of a liberal democracy, there's a success in terms of protecting human rights. In terms of a true democracy, where the government actively solves societal problems, actively and effectively, that's the rub, that's the problem. We don't have that now. Our governments are failing in that regard. So we do not have a true democracy in that sense. Because our societal problems persist. Today, we see war, threat of war, pollution, poverty, homelessness, crime, illiteracy, privation, currency devaluation, and so on. These are the things that the government should take care of, and they have failed to do so, or they are less than successful. I don't want to be too critical. So I conducted a research project. Why are our governments struggling to solve societal problems and therefore achieve the goal of a secure, of a rule of law that's effective? So I did my research project, which I'm going to explain to you now. That's the end of my first session. We had a lot of definitions and
so what level of, what kinds of government were in place, let's say, in the Egyptian time?
Egyptian times would be authoritarian.
Okay. Well, and it was it a theocracy or was it?
No, well, sometimes the kingdom is mixed in with theocracy.
Okay.
So in France, you had the Louis XVI, and you had the royalty, what do you call it, the upper class.
Yeah.
And then you had the church. They all had a lot of power in terms of laws and lawmaking. So there's a mix of theocracy and monarchy and so on.
So other questions, and also feel free to drop your questions in the chat if you're attending online.
So I have a question. I'm wondering whether you have looked at Asian history, because to my knowledge, there have been democratic republics way back about 2,500 years ago, especially in some parts of India. And then there were other government forms in places like China, again, over 2,000 years ago. I wonder whether you looked into that aspect of the history.
I haven't studied that to the extent that you're speaking. I'm thinking of my definition of democracy is centered on performance, and so I would like to review. If you could give me a reference, I would like to see how well they did, because I'm leading into the present time when we have the tools to solve problems and we're not doing it. So
Thank you.
I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Steve.
Oh, okay, I think you can hear me. I'm not sure if people online can. Oh, I can see my voice being transcribed. So good. So I wonder if you could just give a couple comments about how lawmaking changes from moving from like a subsistence type society where you're just trying to struggle and survive to, I guess, the pursuit of happiness, right? Were there any particular transitions or things that changed? From the idea of don't take my corn, to now we're looking for overall societal well-being.
Yeah, as the populations grew and you had cities, and so and you had to have permanent scribes and people who could make law and record law and so on. So that the subsistence type of government was very informal. But it evolved into a very formal structure of law in the authoritarian governments. And so in the Dark Ages, we had monarchies. And the Roman government was a very strong administrative state. And the term Caesar morphed into czar. It was authoritarian government with the head of a strong head of government. I would say in that we developed universities towards the late Middle Ages, and their purpose was to develop people that could read and write and record and speak. So they made a big emphasis on debate and speech making and numbers, so that they could conduct the business of government, because of you have taxes, you have to keep record of it, and property and so on. So there was a gradual transition from very informal to a formal government, where in the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, it was mostly ruled by force, but then it evolved in the late Middle Ages into a sophisticated administrative state. Don't know if that answers you exactly.
Maybe I want to try to ask it another way, and that was, and I didn't hear it as well, but did the Paleolithic campfire, did you consider or qualify that as a rule of law environment, or was that also a rule of man?
That was rule of man.
Okay.
Rule of law is when it's recorded in a form that everybody can see. So they had no books or records of any kind, except by oral tradition. So we've had rule of man forever. We're just now getting into rule of law. Okay.
I've got a question, if possible. I think it was on slide 44. I think you were saying that democracy is easy to measure, and you had 2 or 3 metrics on that slide. It reminded me of the saying that figures don't lie, but liars do figure. And so I wonder, is that is the problem, if measurement is easy, is the problem with not knowing what the problem is? You know, you talk to different people or different groups or political parties, and they all say it's a different problem. So yeah, if you can, is this slide for, maybe it's just before slide, maybe 43? I think you were saying that it was easy to measure. There you go.
This one?
Yeah.
These are all measurable parameters. We can measure the level of human rights, the level of living standards, and the level of the quality of life by numbers. So we can quantify the performance of government by measuring these parameters. And this is what Jefferson was talking about in terms of the rights and liberty of the people.
Right. But the difficulty I have is that everybody says that these are the things they care about. And yet, they have very different or opposite perceptions sometimes of whether these measures are improving or not. So where do you, so if you think that it's all, if you're saying that it's measurable and we have good measures for it, then where is the problem in that? If the measures are good, then how is it that we have different major groups of people, significant sizes of population, thinking very opposite things about whether these things are improving or not?
Well, the idea is to push as far as you can into quantitative analysis. Quality of life includes the incidence of crime. So some neighborhoods have a lot of crime, some don't. So that's a measure of the quality of life in terms of security. In terms of living standards, your disposable income, the stability of the currency. We can make quantitative measurements of these things. In terms of human rights, there's an institution called Freedom House, which measures the level of political rights and civil liberties of all of the governments, and makes a ranking of them from 1 to, I think there's 180 governments that they measure. So not to argue with you, but these quantities, human rights, living standards, and quality of life, are things that we can agree on that are measurable. what is the level of pollution? What is the level of crime? What is the level of war? What is the level of homelessness? And that determines the level of democracy. If we have high levels of these problems, that's a problem for democracy. We need to solve those problems. And we can use quantitative measures on how well the government is performing. So I'm saying that they are measurable and that we should measure them, and that would be the basis for moving forward with writing laws that would solve these problems and have quantitative outcomes.
So are you saying our current measures aren't correct, or are you saying our current measures are correct?
Or they aren't being used.
We have measures of these parameters, and they're in the state of California, where I'm from. Crime rates have gone up, homelessness has gone up. Those are very measurable parameters. So what I'm getting to is having standards for measuring things, and we can agree on that. We can say crime is a measurable thing, and we can, if we have an increase in crime, then we should find out why that happens and why that is a failing of government. So I'm saying that these are measurable, and that's the basis for moving forward, and we can agree on what those measures are.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
We have 3 more sections. If you all are good with moving from this section, but also if you have to leave early, or if you still have thoughts on this, please feel free to share those in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get a response back to you. But do you need a quick break before part 2? Okay. But now we're going to move into the second part 2 of 4, which is the threat to democracy. And I'll make sure to share this. Maybe. All right, can people online see the slides as well? Awesome. There's food for those of you in person. Smells great.
Oh, yeah. Lobster bar.
Okay, so I set out to find out why is it that we are unable to solve societal problems through our bodies of laws? Why do we have crime and pollution and poverty? We're doing so well with advances in science. Why are we doing so poorly with our governing part of our lives? So I did a research project where not advancing. I looked at how we design laws.
Might have to old school click.
Yes. So I investigated the lawmaking process of state governments. I investigated the lawmaking process of U.S. state governments. I found that the traditional method of lawmaking begins with an idea for a law. Somebody comes with an idea, you go to a Google search and say, how are laws made? It says begins as an idea. That idea is then drafted or transcribed into a written petition or a bill. And that bill is in the form of a future law. And that bill is then presented to the legislature for review. And then the bill is enacted into law or is rejected by the Congress, or it is enforced. Now, this part number 2 here, when the idea is drafted into a written petition, that's where the design of laws takes place. It does not take place in the legislature. Legislators do not design laws. They review bills that have already been written, that have already been created. The bill design process operates outside of the legislature. So I wanted to see what are the guidelines for writing bills, because these bills are supposed to be for the benefit of the people in terms of problem solving. So I found that 30 of the US state governments have bill design manuals. This is a typical build design manual, and this one's from Florida. Most of these are several hundred pages long. And what I did is I reviewed the build drafting manuals for their content of problem-solving elements, because a law is a problem-solving tool. It has no aesthetics whatsoever. It is purely 100% a tool, a useful device. Being so, it solves problems. So what are the requirements in a law for problem definition, analysis, and prioritization? What is the, does it include a purpose statement and a method of sanction selection? Were cost and risk analyses part of the build design process? Was there a citation of references and databases? Was there a follow-up evaluation requirement in the design of the law? And did the person who wrote the law or the bill, did they sign their name? So this is how I investigated the build design manuals in terms of their requirements. My research findings. In terms of problem-solving elements, there was no requirement that a problem be defined. Some of the build design manuals said, well, it's a good idea that you should know what the problem is. No kidding. There was no requirement for analysis of problems. When problems were identified, there was no citation of here's how it was analyzed. Basically, there's no requirement for problem definition. How can you solve a problem that hasn't been defined? It's impossible to solve a problem that has not been defined. So that's a big strike. Problem prioritization, no requirement. You have a war over here and a post office here that doesn't have a name. Which one should we vote on? Well, they have equal priority. Purpose statement. This is inexplicable. Not only is a purpose statement not required in a law, several of the build design manuals say, we advise you, the law designer, do not include a statement of purpose. So people are obliged to obey a law that has no statement of purpose. How do you measure the performance of a law that has no statement of purpose? I cannot explain this. They say, well, in the courts might interpret it in a way that goes against your original intent. Well, what is your original intent? You should have a statement of purpose. Not required. What is the rationale for selecting the sanction? Should it be a tariff or a fine or a subsidy or a license requirement, whatever, no requirement. Cost analysis, there are 8 different costs of laws. Basically, the only cost that's considered is the drain from the treasury, but the cost of research and development, the cost of compliance and enforcement, the cost of the courts, not considered. Risk analysis, none. Several of the manuals said you should, not must, you should make sure that your law is not unconstitutional. Say if you pass a bill into law that's unconstitutional, well, that would be embarrassing. Well, no kidding, you're going to trample on somebody's human rights. That's embarrassing. That to me would be criminal. No consideration of risk analysis in terms of living standards, quality of life. Not done. Basis in knowledge. If you're going to write a law of government, there's no requirement that this is based on knowledge, that you have a basis in facts. There's no citation of references. A couple of the build design manuals said, well, if you want to list a reference, you can cite the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or the Atlanta Constitution. These are not reliable sources of knowledge. So our laws are written without a basis in knowledge. It's a flying saucer landed in my backyard yesterday. Can you prove it? Well, you just have to take my word for it. Follow-up evaluation when a law is passed. How do you follow up on it? No requirement. So laws are passed, they're done with it. Signature of the designer. We do not know who designs our laws for us. In fact, at the website of of the US government, House of Representatives, they say that the bill designers have a passion for anonymity. They do not want to be known. So we do not know who writes our laws for us or what their qualifications are. They may have a PhD in 5 different subjects, but I'd like to see what their qualifications are. We don't know. So the conclusion is that the bill design manuals for the US state governments are unacceptable as bill design guides. They lack definitions, priorities, cost risk analyses, methodologies, knowledge base, validation, or certification of designers. This puts a big burden on the legislature because every year legislatures are inundated with all of these bills that are poorly designed, that have missing all the elements of problem solution. Imagine if you were in charge of buying fruit and you have to go to a fruit market and you had to pick among fruit that was not ripe or overripe or bruised or and you had to pick some. None of them were good. This is the situation of legislators. They have to pick bills to pass into law, but they don't meet any of the standards of problem solution. So this is a untenable situation for legislators. So they're put in a bind. But in terms of passing bills into law, the legislatures are successful. The 50 state governments of the United States annually enact tens of thousands of bills into law. The state of California last year enacted 800 bills. In some cases, the 50 state governments enact as many as 40,000 bills into laws. Now, this tells us one thing, that the existing body of laws is not doing its job, or else we wouldn't need all these new bills. If our body of laws was doing the job that it should be doing, we wouldn't need even one new law. So what this does, the result of this is that even though they pass all these laws, our problems still persist. Crime, poverty, illiteracy, and so on. One analogy is the legislators say we're doing a good job. We passed all these laws. You go to call the dentist. You say I've got a toothache, and the dentist says I'll write a law. 2 weeks later, say I still have a toothache. The dentist says I'll write a law, another law. I say, well, I'm not interested in that. I want you to fix my problem. So we have a problem of homelessness or poverty or crime. We go to our legislature and we say, we need to fix this. They say, we'll write laws. And they write laws, and then 6 months later, they have the same situation. We say, we still have a problem with crime and pollution and so on. We'll write more laws. Disconnect. There's no relationship between laws and problem solution. The law design process is not a problem-solving process. It's incapable of satisfying the purpose of democracy. It produces laws with multiple defects and omissions, adds to the number and complexity of the body of laws, increases the potential for ineffectiveness, chaos, and arbitrary enforcement of laws. We're on this roller coaster producing all these laws and going nowhere. Here is the grand irony, is that legislators give lip service to solving problems, but they use a law design process that does not have problem solution as its objective. The objective of the legislative process is to produce laws. It is not to solve problems. So you see all this action of legislatures meeting, we passed all these laws. There's no connection. So what happens is the size of the body of laws, size and complexity goes up over time. And this is a threat to democracy because the continued overproduction of defective and non-performing laws poses a threat of arbitrary rule, of the rule of man, to replace the rule of law. This shows you what happens. At the bottom of the curve on the left is no laws. That's anarchy. That doesn't work. We need to have laws. There's a certain point when you have an optimum number. But as you keep making more and more laws, they start to bump into one another, and you have so many laws that they have to be enforced selectively. But when you have selective enforcement of law, that becomes arbitrary rule, and another term for that is tyranny. So as we keep making more and more laws, we're going in this direction. This is a dangerous process. It is a threat to our democracy. So to satisfy the purpose of democracy, governments must replace the traditional method of lawmaking with a competent problem-solving process for the creation and validation of laws. That's the proposed solution. And the proposed solution, of course, is to replace traditional lawmaking with scientific lawmaking. So now I want to talk about science. Break time.
Yeah, I have a question then. So back to Cameron's question about what do we measure?
Yeah.
They're doing exactly what they measure. Get what you measure. They're measuring the number of laws. If we turned it around and said, your job is to improve these measures through laws, would they evolve a better lawmaking process?
One thing that interests me is that they say the purpose of the law is to raise taxes or to make it a tariff. So if you look at the law, in fact, they say that if they state a purpose, it should be a verb form with ing at the end, like creating, modifying, instituting. What they're doing is they're confusing means and ends. When you say my purpose of this law was to raise taxes or to lower taxes, and I lowered taxes, and so therefore I satisfied my purpose. No, that confuses means and ends. Raising or lowering taxes is a means. What is the end result that you expect? Let me, if I give you an example. The purpose of a firefighter is to fight fires. The purpose of a truck driver is to drive a truck. The purpose of a surgeon is to perform surgery. And the purpose of a legislator is to make laws. Are those correct statements? Absolutely not. The purpose of a firefighter is to put the fire out, not to fight fire. You can fight fire all day long. If it keeps burning, you're still fighting it. You have to have a problem solution. The purpose of a truck driver is to deliver a cargo to a destination safely and on time. The purpose of a surgeon is to cure a medical problem. You wouldn't want to get sick within 100 miles of a hospital where the surgeons think their purpose is to perform surgery. You have a rash on your arm and you go in and they'll say, we'll schedule you for surgery tomorrow. Hold on a minute. The purpose of a legislator is not to make laws. The purpose of a legislator is to solve societal problems. So we have this problem, means and ends problem with our present lawmaking process. I can go into this one or
Some questions
Okay.
for that. Working top to bottom, I'll start off with Kirk. Why would any politician or person with vast wealth or power want to box themselves in with the rules you propose on slide 9 at SEC?
we're going to slide 9.
I'll go back to slide.
Okay. It is we, the people, who are the sovereign, and we want to make rules so that our laws perform according to our human rights, living standards, and quality of life. And if people are, if rich people or a person with vast wealth, it isn't for them. We don't make laws for them. We make laws for the people as a whole, for the citizenry.
This slide?
Yes, thank you. That was it. My primary point is that there's the system that exists today, which is not performing as you're explaining here, and the system we might wish. But the very interesting question, even going back to the one about the ancient Asian systems, the mere fact that the world is not covered with high-performing democratic systems today suggests there's some deep systemic human factor that drives us away from any possible basically something that will evolve to an increasing number of democracies. It hasn't happened over a huge number of experiments over many, 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 many thousands of years, as evidenced by the situation today. So what the heck is going on there? What is that fundamental human factor, or maybe even deeper than human factor, that makes it so this apparently can't work in a stable fashion?
Well, I'm directing my energies not towards humans, but to the standards for laws and lawmaking. We have standards of quality for nuclear reactors, pharmaceuticals, and so on and so on. And we have no standards for laws. And so lawmakers can have a wide range of actions they can take without violating anything. I want to have high standards of quality for laws. And I think we can do that, and we can have a much better performance of our laws. And human nature will be able to interact with that process. It'd be anecdotal, but my practice of medicine, I dealt with people with all kinds of varied backgrounds and everything, but our purpose was to solve medical problems. And we used the best knowledge and equipment possible. And we're not doing that now with our lawmaking process, with our bodies of laws, and we can. So I want to move in that direction.
But I think he has a good point. If we're not aware of the resistive or counter forces that are present, say, in the environment, then we may not be solving the whole problem, or at least accounting for that force. That force might be human self-interest, or not even just human, right? Self-interest of individual being.
To piggyback off of that real quick, I think he's just trying to highlight the assumptions. We have a lot of these underlying assumptions, and he just tried to highlight that. Fine.
Yeah.
There was another question.
Was there another question, Dixie?
I actually have a question.
Yeah.
So first off, Schoolhouse Rock did not prepare for this. Far more, I would say, problematic than I could have even before. I really appreciate the discussion on what's happening with how we write laws. And so my question is, and I might be preempting the next couple parts.
Do you have the microphone? Is it picking you up?
Just picking up.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Better? Okay.
You are getting transcribed.
You're doing fine.
Now, oh, there we go. So my question is whether fixing this kind of legislation process issue, right, where our laws don't necessarily have a purpose, they're not geared towards problem solving. Is this a legislation process fix, or is this a democratic process fix, in the sense that can we correct some of these issues just by essentially changing how we write laws, or do we also have to change how we, say, elect and run the government?
My focus is on establishing standards of quality for the creation and evaluation of laws. That's the same thing that we do routinely in every other field of human endeavor, in pharmaceuticals, in food preparation, in aeronautics, in communication. We have high standards of creation of useful devices and for their evaluation, quality assurance, and follow-up correction of errors. We can apply that same quality process for our laws. Laws are an inanimate thing. We're not dealing with people, we're dealing with laws. So we can make laws to be effective, efficient, user-friendly, and we're not doing that, but the opportunity to do so is there. Let's take advantage of it. We've done it with every other field, we can do it with laws. So enslave laws to the needs of humans, instead of right now, humans are enslaving laws to their own selfish purpose, which is political advantage usually, or financial advantage. But we can change that. Okay,
So 2 more questions. Well, maybe more than 2 questions in the chat. The second one was also from Kirk of wouldn't the bad guys always be able to find a gap between any fixed finite number of laws?
there's no such thing as a perfect human answer when humans are involved, but we can move in the direction of laws that are truly effective and have no loopholes. It's no such thing as a perfect law. I have outlined what an ideal law is, but we can approach that. But we're taking no steps to even approach that now. So it's wide open for interpretation and abuse. And the result is that we have ongoing wars now. We have immense poverty and so on. We can do better through a rule of law that is characterized by high standards of quality.
And then the next question from Caleb in the chat, which may also be addressed in the coming sections, is how would you deal with the bloat of laws currently in the CFR and state law codes? In your mind, what would be a process of returning a more stable base of laws? I think lawmaking not only needs a process rework, but so does law breaking.
Okay, that's covered by the follow-up validation of laws or quality assurance. How do we deal with a large body of laws? We apply quality assurance, and I have a list of the laws that would be subject to repeal. We only want the laws that are truly effective in solving our societal problems. So that's coming up.
Oh, well, on that, David, I want to give you a 5-minute break to grab a quick drink or something, and then everyone in the room can also grab their lunch. So for those online, we'll take just a 5-minute break. Don't leave, because unlike many sessions that you may see, we're actually going to give you some solutions and answers to these things. So Dr. Schrunk will propose some changes and those options. So stick around for a real quick 5-minute break, stretch online, and we'll come back for the next part.
Okay, I want to talk about, I want to fix the lawmaking process by expanding science to encompass laws in the lawmaking process and have a science of laws, engineering discipline of laws. And they would operate the same way that other sciences operate to produce products of the highest possible quality. So I'm going to review science from the Paleolithic to the Renaissance to the present. It's kind of a fun journey. Science has 2 divisions, engineering and investigative science. Engineering science creates things, airplanes and rockets and so on. Investigative science discovers, yes, and dissects things. So investigative science looks at the spectrum of the stars, and they dissect frogs, and they smash atoms. They deconstruct and gather knowledge. Creative science uses that knowledge to build up new things like rockets and pharmaceuticals. Creative science is the problem-solving process, problem definition and analysis. What is our goal? What is our purpose? How do we measure our success? We access knowledge and appropriate tools and materials. We use our brainstorming and our expertise and modeling. Modeling is central to engineering. You build models, it breaks down, no problem. You can go in another direction, so you can optimize your models so that you can then produce the best result. You test and validate experiments. You develop a new tool and solutions to problems, and the results are recorded, and you have new knowledge. So engineering or invention uses knowledge, tools, and the problem-solving process to produce new tools and new knowledge and problem solution. This equation is exponential in growth. From the Paleolithic, yes.
Sorry, just since people are eating, why don't you try the mic and see if we get feedback?
Didn't you hear me now? All right, I'll try that.
Now get 2 things on your hand, yeah.
That's good. From the Paleolithic to the Renaissance, there was just a very slow progress of invention of creative science. The usefulness, the number and variety of tools gradually increased. but it was a slow process because there was lack of knowledge. Knowledge is the very important key to problem solving. So the problem for creative science during this time was a lack of a source reliable knowledge. There were no books, no records, no libraries. However, at the time of the Renaissance, there was a big leap forward. I got this image off the internet. It's a pretty cool image. I said, I want a Renaissance person. And they gave me this image. I don't know what that skull is doing there. And if you look at his hands, his fingers have an unusual configuration. But probably the most interesting aspect, this has nothing to do with science, by the way. The sailboat there, the sails are furled so that they're billowing to the back, so that the ship is actually backing up. But this is the Renaissance, okay? All right, the scientific method was invented as a new tool, and it was able to generate reliable knowledge of the structure and mechanics of the physical world. This greatly enhanced the ability of creative science to create new tools, and it resulted in the Industrial Revolution, and it's where we are today. Now, there's a book called The History of Knowledge by Charles Van Doren. This is a great book. It's a great history book. I'd recommend it. It's easy to read and understand. He wrote, of all the kinds of knowledge that the West has given to the world, the most valuable is the method of acquiring new knowledge, called scientific method. It was invented by a series of European thinkers from about 1550 to 1700. And I think it is interesting that before the Renaissance, there were two principal spheres of intellectual enterprise. That would be religion and philosophy. The universities that were developing at that time were based on religion and philosophy, and they used the scholasticism as the basis for their coursework. And scholasticism held that everything that can be known is already known. And if somebody discovers something new, like the jawbone of the dinosaur or something, you could explain it or investigate it by means of debate and reasoning and coming to a consensus opinion. So all knowledge was known before the Renaissance. And then with science, science worked its way into the third sphere of intellectual enterprise, and it's now a major part of our university setting. The domain of religion is the spiritual world. The domain of philosophy is the constellation of secular ideas and theories, and the domain of science is the observable physical world. Guess where laws of government are? They work in the physical world. The invention of the scientific method led to a separate branch of science called science, which focuses on the discovery of new knowledge. The purpose of investigative science is to produce knowledge. Science doesn't produce cures for cancer or new computer chips. It produces knowledge. So investigative science uses knowledge and tools in the scientific method to make new knowledge. This is an exponential curve. And I'm so impressed with what science has done, and I am directly involved with that. The compass of investigative science is truth. To the extent that truth in the physical universe can be defined, science always and reliably seeks truth, accepts truth, and rejects non-truth. Science is a truth machine. It doesn't give us absolute truth, but it's asymptotic to the truth. It gives us a good description. We'll probably never know the exact structure of the atom, but we'll be close. The characteristics of creative science engineering: no new tool or device of creative science is accepted unless it is superior to the tool that it replaces. So that change is always characterized by improvement. We go from the vacuum tube to the transistor to the integrated circuit and so on. So science and engineering use knowledge and tools to make more knowledge and better tools. Remarkable quote that Will and Ariel Durant wrote a series of volumes of book on history, covering all time. If you have a summer or maybe a year or so, it'd be good reading. But in the age of Louis the 14th, in the court, it was recognized, it was generally agreed that science had now, in 1688, advanced beyond any stage reached in ancient Greece or Rome. So that there was a 2,000-year period when it wasn't obvious at all that there was any advancement in science. And we can say today that we are more advanced in terms of scientific knowledge now than we were 2 weeks ago. We're on the upswing. What are the characteristics of science and engineering, the ethos and culture? Characterized by high levels of scholarship, to PhD, strong basis in knowledge, quality standards of procedures and products, characterized by integrity. If you want to be a scientist and you falsify data, you're no longer recognized as a scientist. You're excluded from the scientific community. You have to have integrity. It's characterized by innovation with the design of experiments and new devices. It has to have expertise in conduct of experiments, and it's outcomes driven by improvement and success. So science and engineering is a good thing to have on your side if you're going to do something useful. The expanding and mutually supporting fields of investigative and creative science are the principal optimistic sources of advancement of the human condition, whereby the knowledge and variety and prowess of tools are growing exponentially. Current problems are being solved by ever-improving means, and problems of the next higher order of complexity are in the process of being solved. So we see that every science is a success. And this is borne out in the fields and success is measured by ever-increasing bodies of knowledge and ever-improving problem-solving technologies. In aerospace, communications, medicine, pharmaceuticals, and so on, in every field. Michael Milken, the chairman of the Milken Institute, commented a year ago the following: science now allows us to respond to health crises with antibiotics, vaccines, statins, genome sequencing, immunotherapies, monoclonal antibodies, antiretroviral cocktails, robotic surgeries, advanced nutrition, powerful new diagnostic scans, focused ultrasound, artificial intelligence, CRISPR gene editing, and mRNA vaccines. These are all the product of science and engineering. And that this would be considered magic 50 years ago or 100 years ago, even now. So here's the opportunity. Laws and lawmaking have been under the tutelage of religion and philosophy for millennia. They still are. However, laws exist and operate and produce changes in the physical world, which is the domain of science. So the time has arrived to expand science to encompass laws and lawmaking. We have all these other fields that are in the realm of science, nuclear science, genetics, rockets, and so on. Laws and lawmaking are floating out here, but they're in the physical universe. They produce profound changes in the physical universe. We need to measure what they do and how they do it and what the outcomes are. So the idea is to expand science to encompass laws and lawmaking. So I'm proposing a new science, the science of laws, and apply it to lawmaking. So apply the full resources of science and engineering to the creation, maintenance, and optimization of laws to satisfy the purpose of democracy, which is to secure our rights and our liberty. That leads us to the next talk. They would still apply laws in the courts, and they would undergo a judicial review if a law was challenged in the courts. So the role of the judicial branch would be the same as it is now.
So for those who may have not heard that question, to summarize, it was, where would the judicial system fit in? All right, I see. Okay, all right, thank you. Do you see laws as a system of interest that has been evolving over many generations? If so, why would we not expect major unintended or unwanted side effects or knock-on effects on other human systems when we create your suggested change?
I don't quite understand this.
Dr. Sharuti, do you mind commenting on this question?
Yeah, so in we have so many examples of evolving systems, or even in nature, when we interfere or bring about a change, it doesn't just change or impact the system of interest that is in the focus, but also very often we have unwanted side effects or knock-on effects on other systems. Why would we not expect, or is part of your study also trying to predict the knock-on effects, or what would be the impact of updating the lawmaking process on other systems? So we don't just have laws, right? We have the whole society. So yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, well, unintended side effects, it's like designing a pharmaceutical. You have good intentions, but you have unintended side effects. So the key here is to measure outcomes. If you say, gee, I didn't mean that to happen at all, well, okay, fine, then you need to change it. We need to create a body of laws that has the least undesirable side effects. And that is totally being ignored now in our design process. So by expanding science and engineering into lawmaking, we're going to become aware of the side effects of laws that are undesirable. And if we miss those in the original design process, then we will find out when we measure the outcome that, gee, we didn't realize that it was going to cause this undesirable side effect, and we can correct it. So by using science and engineering, creation and validation, we're going to be self-correcting in the direction of optimum design of laws to produce desired outcomes in terms of human rights, living standards, and quality of life, and meet and satisfy the purpose of democracy, which is to secure those rights and liberty.
I might argue that the system that's in place right now is serving something or someone. When it changes, some of those recipients will lose. I don't think that's an unintended consequence, but they will fight the change.
Yeah, well, I worked in a lab where several of the workers didn't show up on Monday. I said, what happened? Well, the standards were increased and they weren't certified. So they had to go get certified, and then they came back. But we want to continue to elevate our standards for laws and lawmaking to the highest level, at the same level that we expect now of airline operations and aircraft design and pharmaceutical design and nuclear reactor design. And when there's a salmonella in spinach, the whole industry is shut down because something fell apart, didn't work. Something happened that wasn't intended. Same thing with laws. When a law goes wrong, it affects human rights. So we need to be really good with our design and make close follow-up evaluations. She had a question. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak to your proposed science of law and the relationship between your new idea and already existing fields such as political science.
Well, the design of a law of government, I'm going to answer your question in a roundabout way. The design of a law of government is a design challenge. So it is an engineering challenge. It has a philosophical dimension, it has a legal dimension, but design of anything is a design challenge, and that's what engineers do. So I foresee a design team, a design industry that would be based on systems engineering, and that's what I'm going to get into next. But the design team would have sociologists, psychologists, economists, statisticians, human factors people. It would be the ultimate multidisciplinary design process, bringing in every dimension of expertise to produce a law that satisfies the purpose. So all the people that you're mentioning, or the expertise that you're mentioning, would be enfolded into the design process. But it would be an engineering process. So that has to be created, and that's what I'm going towards. Does that do it? Okay. Yes.
Came in late, so I missed the first part, but I was wondering, could you speak just a little bit about the relationship of democracy with the creation of laws? Because I'm hearing you saying like, yes, we can use kind of this linear progression of science and then apply it to the creation of laws. I came because my dissertation is on the moon, and how can we create democratic structures to like kind of protect the moon from what's happening next? And so I'm wondering, like, when you're thinking about laws in relation to democracy, are you thinking that you would actually use the democratic process to inform the laws, or would that be more of an output of the creation of the laws?
Okay, the design of laws and evaluation of laws and that whole process of the science of laws would be dedicated to satisfying the purpose of democracy, as we have defined here by Jefferson. The purpose of democracy is to secure the rights and liberty of the people. And so we want to design a system, a lawmaking and evaluation system that satisfies that purpose. So you have this whole new industry dedicated to achieving the best result, the best outcome for the society of people, the citizenry of a government, in terms of their rights and liberty, which is the purpose of democracy.
Love that. Thank you. Could I just add, the interesting thing I think about the moon is that there's all this discussion in the UN that this is going to be democratic and we're going to bring in everyone, but then you got to wonder, like, well, who's included in the democratic process? Is it indigenous people and women and people that are marginalized, or is it, what I mean, are elites that are like, that's kind of that slippery slope. And I know we can't solve it today, but
in my moon book, I have an appendix on how we're going to create laws on the moon.
yes, I'm gonna read it. Maybe I'll win it. I gotta take.
All right, I see some great questions in the chat as well, but I'm going to propose moving on to part 4 and then remaining time left for discussion and questions, if that sounds good. Also, the drawing for the moon book is at Avos tonight, but I'm sure if we set you up with Dr. Schrunk, we can see about getting you a signed copy or something, maybe. All right. All right, we are now moving into part 4, the much anticipated science of laws. Slideshow.
I made my living practicing medicine. I retired some time ago. But the focus of the practice of medicine, all the people in the hospital, their focus was to solve medical problems and to bring all the tools and expertise that were available together to solve medical problems. We now have a problem with our democracies in that we are unable to adequately solve problems of war, crime, poverty, homelessness. So we have the marvelous tool called science and engineering that's sitting off here idle. And we have laws that are being made without the input from this resource. So I want to expand science and engineering to create laws that will bring all the resources of humankind, all the knowledge that we have and procedures to solve problems that then satisfy the purpose of democracy. It's not being done. I think it's possible to do it. And I'm thinking that systems engineering will play a big role in that. So that's the topic of my next topic, or that's my topic coming up here. Okay. ConOps, concept of operations for the science of laws. I'm going to, this is a paper that was, or a presentation that was given in December at the combined mini conference of San Diego and Los Angeles chapters of systems engineering. My co-author is Dr. John Wood. He's a PhD in systems engineering, and myself. So we want to, this is the outline for creating a new science and what it would involve and who would the participants be. I want to discuss the goal, the outline of the ConOps, the content, and what we learned from doing this exercise. And if I have time, I'm going to get into the systems engineering application to our working group. The goal of the effort is to share the big picture vision of a science-directed lawmaking ecosystem, including all stakeholders and processes that directly or indirectly support the creation, scientific validation, modification, and retirement of laws and bodies of laws. Collectively, this knowledge-based ecosystem would solve societal problems, not just address them, but to solve societal problems. It is effective, responsible, and cost-efficient, and would reflect our noblest aspirations. This is the outline of the talk, the scope, the documents, the current system, why we need to change, and some operational scenarios. And this is the ecosystem. At the bottom of this pyramid is an individual law. It can be studied and evaluated and created to address a single issue. This is addressed with systems engineering. Systems engineering is capable of addressing a single law. The next stage up is all the laws in a single jurisdiction, such as a municipality. This is best addressed with systems of systems engineering. System of systems engineering. So how do all these laws interact with one another to produce the best outcome for the people in a municipality? The next level up is multiple levels of bodies of laws, such as federal, state, and local laws. How do they all interact? This is going to be a very complex interconnected system, but it needs to be studied. Some laws negate other laws, for example. Then the entire lawmaking ecosystem at the top, the interaction of all stakeholders and processes that directly or indirectly support the creation, validation, modification, and retirement of laws and bodies of laws, addressed with enterprise systems engineering. This is a big project. We need to study it and understand it and adapt it to our needs. The reference to documents for creating a new science, new engineering discipline of laws to begin with the American State Papers, the Federalist Papers, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the great books, Syntopicon. These are unfortunately written by dead white men, but these are all the major ideas over millennia on topics of law, government, justice, science, liberty, tyranny, democracy, and so on. It's a wonderful reference for the whole kaleidoscope of human experience. The Nkosi Systems Engineering Handbook. Dr. Wood was kind enough to include my book here. Interesting, the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry has come out with a publication called Agile Governance. And they are introducing the concept of designing laws and then measuring the outcome and modifying the design of laws based upon the measured outcome. So this is the beginning of a systems engineering approach to lawmaking. They are leading the way. And then another reference would be the government build design manuals, which I covered earlier, which are a description of how not to do it. Now, the current system, it creates laws, but it should be solving problems. Creating laws is not the same thing as solving problems. They have lots of laws. And it's a feed-forward control system. There's no feedback loop for correction. And the lawmaking process is done with a variation of the Socratic method, where you use speech-making, debate, logical argumentation, consensus opinion. This is fine, but it can be done without referring to any basis in scientific knowledge or methodology. So it is not acceptable as the defining way. I have to give you a story. Back in the late Middle Ages, there was a group of scholars that met once a month. And they would come together and they would use the Socratic method to discuss any topic. And they would always meet on a full moon. And the reason that they met on a full moon is that after they've sat around and had a nice dinner and some drink and so on, they would ride their horses home, and their horses knew the way home. So on a full moon, they could fall asleep on their horse and the horse would get them home. And I think that's where the term lunatics came about. But anyway, they would sit down at a table and they would discuss, well, any topic we want to discuss, we'll bring it up. And they said, well, how many teeth does a horse have? Well, the logic would be that the horse's mouth is symmetrical top to bottom, so it would be a number evenly divisible by 2, but it's also symmetrical right to left, so evenly divisible by 4. And a horse needs incisor teeth and molar teeth. So the number is somewhere between 32 and 44. And the story is that Francis Bacon, who initiated studies into the scientific method, said, well, the way to know how many teeth a horse has is to put on your boots, go to the barnyard, and lift up the horse's lip and count the teeth. Then you will know. You won't have an opinion. You'll actually have knowledge. And this, where we are now, we're still debating the number of teeth in a horse's mouth without actually knowing what's going on. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting story. So the lawmaking process here is a feed-forward control system. As long as people have ideas, we can have laws. We're just cranking out laws like crazy. If this was a paperclip making machine, you feed in wire, it's going to keep making paper clips. What if you have too many paper clips? You put them in a warehouse, then you make more paper clips. Okay, the justification for the nature of changes. Why do we need to change the system? The current system has a lack of problem-solving focus. It lacks quality standards. It's based on opinion, not knowledge. There's no feedback. There's no problem definition or analysis, no prioritization of problems, no sufficient cost analysis, no risk analyses, no measure of success, no identification or accountability of designers. And the result is out of control government spending, debt, insolvency, inefficiency. This needs to be changed. Okay. The priorities among changes, we need to have a law validation and optimization program. We need to have a process for setting priorities for laws and problems. We only have so many resources to adjust problems. We should address the most pressing problems first. We need to set up a law engineering system for using innovation, modeling, risk analyses, literature reviews, and so on. We need to have a law engineer and scientist education program, a law engineer and scientist certification program. There is no such thing as law design engineering or law science now. It's not taught in any school. We want to fill that void. So how would this work? Well, we would want to solve or mitigate or prevent societal problems and use a feedback control system. So these various steps here, problem exploration and prioritization will be done by the legislature. The legislature's purpose is to discuss the great issues of the day and come up with the problems on a priority basis to be solved. They would then assign the task of solving the problem to an engineering group. As I mentioned before, a multidisciplinary group that would be an engineering design challenge, but it would be composed of people of multiple specialties. The review and enactment of the law would be done by the legislature. The operation and enforcement would be done by the executive branch. In other words, we're going to be using the same structure of government, the same framework of government. Nothing of that would be changed. It's just that we're going to design laws using standards of engineering and science. Law validation would be done by engineers and scientists, and this would be where you were discussing the judicial branch. They would also review laws when they're challenged in the courts with judicial review. Judicial review, the problem with that is it's a passive process. It works only when the law is challenged. There's nobody actively looking at a law to see how it's working. But the judicial branch would play a role. Law modification or amendment would be done by engineers, and law retirement would be done by the legislature. Research would be done by scientists, and the law curriculum development and refinement would be done at the university level with educators, and then we would need a certification program. So we're creating a big new scientific system. One operational scenario in the state of North Carolina in the 1980s came to the attention of the legislature that there was a high incidence of morbidity and mortality in automobile accidents. It also came to their attention by the Department of Transportation that seatbelts are useful in reducing injuries and so on. So the legislature contacted the Department of Transportation, and together they designed a law that's saying that you must wear a seatbelt if you're driving a car. And there'd be a fine of $25 or something if you're not wearing a seatbelt. And they said, okay, there's a problem. This is a possible solution. They enacted the law. And 2 years later, they measured the results. And there was a dramatic reduction in morbidity and mortality, injuries and deaths from automobile accidents because of this law. And then they continued to monitor it. And they said, if the law doesn't work, we'll get rid of it. But obviously, it's still in effect. Now, the results of this experiment were published in the scientific literature. And it said the legislative intent was satisfied by the enactment of this law. So where was this, in what publication was this study, where was it published? In what kind of journal? It was the Journal of the American Medical Association. Well, that's great because that's fine, but it should have been in the Science of Laws, the Journal of the Science of Law. This is a scientific article on how a law works, and it gives a societal benefit. It reduces injury and death, and the people benefit from it. So this needs to be in a body of knowledge of how laws work, not in the medical journal. So anyway, interesting story. We want to have scientists perform research on laws in terms of the effects on society, economy, and the environment. What does the law do to all of these different areas? We need to have engineers who understand how to create laws and determine the effectiveness of different engineering approaches to the creation of laws. It's something analogous to the aerospace or the aviation industry. It was thought that we should have 2 wings instead of 1 in bicycle landing gear and so on. But as you study and refine, you get better and better at making planes that are safer and faster and so on. There was a quote by Glenn Curtis, for the aviation buffs. One of the first people to design airplanes, and he said, I predict in the very near future that airplanes will be able to go faster than motorcycles. The same thing with laws. We're at a low stage with laws. We're going to have a similar situation. So the summary of the predicted summary of impacts is that we're going to have improvement in the human condition, in that laws will become effective and efficient in solving societal problems. And we will enable governments to be responsible in terms of solvency. We're going to create a new knowledge industry of law scientists and engineers, ever-expanding knowledge of how laws work and do not work. You want to have knowledge of how this law works and this one doesn't. You avoid this one and embellish this one. And how to create more effective and efficient laws. We're predicting that we'll have improved societal conditions, simplified laws, less intrusive in government, financial solvency of government, increased public respect for the rule of law. And we're going to change lawmaking from a feed forward to a feedback control system, and change the focus on creating laws to actually solving problems, and create a new knowledge industry of law scientists, engineers, educators, and accreditors. So we need a new division of systems engineering in the department for lawmaking. What can we expect as this moves forward? What can we expect with the initial resistance of legislators to change the role from lawmaker to trustee? But they are not lawmakers. Legislators are not lawmakers. They don't make laws. They don't design laws. That's done by the people that write bills. So it's a misnomer. But I think this would benefit legislators because they would be given well-designed bills to change into laws or to enact into laws. So having the title of trustee would be a much more elevated than just lawmaker. And there may be initial resistance to governments to the new lawmaking approach. The public may have initial resistance, but gradual acceptance and preference for scientific knowledge over political groups. I'd like to think that would happen. And we need to develop a new branch of science. We need to develop a body of knowledge. This is going to be a huge task, long going. And we need to publish and present law-related scientific literature. There's very little published on how laws work, but it's growing. What we learned, the scope is huge, obviously, and hopefully this document, when we get this published, will help others understand the full vision and science-directed lawmaking ecosystem. And our work is just beginning. I don't see the downside of this. I don't see what the downside is. And the upside is that we will have governments that actually satisfy the purpose of democracy. I think it's very well worth going forward. So I can wrap up. Do we have time?
There, we've got 10 minutes for questions prior to 1 p.m.
So this is excellent, but it does require like the current legislative body, the current government to kind of be on board with this large scale change. I'm wondering, from what I see right now, there's a section of that government that doesn't think, or that seems to disagree with the idea that the federal government or the government at all should work for solve the problem. So how do we bridge that gap to implement?
I love that question.
Well,
I'll give you a dollar in the hallway. Back in the like the 1700s or something, when we were just having the Industrial Revolution, a group of people were working with chemistry and with chemical compounds, and alchemy was the big thing. But the people that were studying chemistry from a scientific standpoint, they said, well, let's have some standards. Let's have a nomenclature for what we're dealing with. And so they developed a new science called chemistry. And it wasn't their purpose to displace or push alchemy to the side. It was just to have a very stable, rational basis for gaining knowledge and publishing knowledge and growing the field of understanding of how chemistry works. So having a new science of laws, the intention is not to displace anybody in Congress or legislature or anything, or not to tell them what to do. We just want to start developing standards for laws and lawmaking and developing a scientific curriculum. And I predict that as this science grows, it will then become adapted as a very efficient and effective. The first government to do this will have a big advantage over other governments because they're going to get rid of laws that are ineffective. And they'll have laws that actually work. And just as an incredible surprise to me, I went to the International Workshop of Systems Engineering in January, and a group came up to me and said, we'd like to apply this. We're talking to our government. We'd like to see how this might interact with the government. We have the systems engineering. The Japanese government is edging in that direction, but the government, you would never predict this. The government of Mongolia wants to do this. They have a democracy, and they want to start looking at having feedback and a science of laws. So it's not something that scientists don't tell anybody what to do. We just gather knowledge and apply it. But it becomes the standard, and pretty soon it's the standard for every industry. So anyway, thank you for that question. I love that.
Does anyone online have a quick question they'd like to comment out? Okay, I just wanted to check if anyone's still online and wanted to say that. Otherwise, I'll pick one. Let's see, Tammy Bond. Okay, I have a personal concern that many engineers and scientists often don't receive enough grounding in philosophical, social, and ethical issues to conduct your exercise in a sophisticated and beneficial manner. How would the arbiters and developers of this new legal system be chosen?
Well, I wouldn't call it a new legal system, but I would say that the philosophical background, sociologic background needed by the people who are practicing this in this field we will need to create a new college curriculum for law, engineers, and scientists. And I believe this would be the ultimate liberal education, because it would require engineers and scientists in this field to have an understanding of law, economics, statistics, sociology, psychology, as well as law design and optimization. So they would primarily be engineers and scientists, but they would have to have the broadest possible background to understand these other facets as well. So this won't happen overnight, but we're going to go in the direction of having a law design and or a law engineering and science field that would have a strong background in all the relevant studies. So that was a question I love to answer.
And ethics. Great point. Congressional Research Service seems to be chartered to do much of this. Why is it not apparently effective?
Well, the way to be effective is to publish in the scientific literature, or to publish your findings. I'm not familiar with this, with the their results, but I found that the whole basis of scientific endeavors is to publish your findings and create things that are reproducible. And that's how you become effective, by showing a pathway that will work. So I can enter why this one is ineffective, but
The outcome,
perhaps.
the data set.
Okay, I'll push it. One more quick question and then we'll close it there. I'll try and synthesize this one a little bit. How will we implement changes to the standards? If we develop a system based on a specific standard, wouldn't that lead to a static structure or one accepted view type of approach? Such a structure might be suitable for engineering or other technical domains, but it could be less effective for human-centric systems. This is because our perspectives and views are constantly evolving in human-centric systems.
I would say every tool that we use is a human-centric system. A pair of pliers is a human-centric system. A computer and laws will be the same way. I don't see a conflict here. We're going to develop standards for the performance of laws, and they will fit in with the human system, or they will be rejected. So they have to work with the human system, and they have to be designed that way. So I think that we need to consider laws as tools, same way that we consider all other tools that interact with humans. All tools interact with humans. Laws will be the same way. So it's not a direct answer to this question, but I don't see any conflicts.
All right, for the sake of time, I'll wrap it up there. So thank you everybody for coming.